The night was alive with the hum of city lights, laughter spilling out of bars, and the occasional whoosh of passing cars. Paul Cortez's laughter joined the symphony, hearty and warm, as he glanced at Sofia, his girlfriend, sitting beside him in the passenger seat of his sleek black sedan. "You're serious?" he asked, his smile widening as she recounted how she'd had sex with her first boyfriend in the back seat of a 1979 Nova. Her laughter bubbled up in response. "Yes, and I still can't believe I did that." A deafening horn shattered the moment. Paul snapped his eyes back to the road, and time seemed to go in slow motion. An 18-wheeler loomed ahead, its massive form turning sluggishly across their lane. "Paul!" she screamed. Instinctively, Paul yanked the wheel to the right, tires screeching in protest. But there was no room, no escape. The impact came with brutal finality. The world spun. Metal crunched and twisted. Shattered glass rained like deadly confetti. Paul's head slammed against the steering wheel as the airbags deployed. When the chaos stilled, smoke filled the car. The acrid stench of burnt rubber and oil hung heavy in the air. Sofia groaned weakly, clutching her arm in agonizing pain. "Paul?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached out to him. Paul didn't answer. His body slumped motionless against the seat, his face pale and expression non-responsive. Paul's family hurried into the hospital. His mother, Karen, clutched her husband's arm, her face etched with fear and disbelief. "Where is he?" Karen demanded, her voice cracking. A nurse guided them to the ICU, where Paul lay surrounded by beeping machines and a tangle of wires. His strong, commanding presence, once a hallmark of his military career, was now reduced to fragility. The doctor's voice was steady but heavy with gravity. "He's in a coma. The next 48 hours will be critical." Karen stifled a sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Paul's father, Stephen, a stoic man of few words, clenched his fists tightly at his sides, his jaw working against the rising tide of emotion. Paul's younger brother, Ethan, stared at his elder sibling with wide, disbelieving eyes. "This is terrible," he murmured. In the corner of the room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a cruel reminder that life could change in the flash of a second. Sofia's body ached, her head throbbed, and the weight of something she couldn't yet name pressed on her chest. A nurse leaned over her. "You're awake," the nurse said gently, her face a mixture of relief and professionalism. "Paul," Sofia croaked, her throat dry and raspy. She tried to sit up, but the sharp pain in her arm made her wince. "Where's Paul?" The nurse hesitated, her hands adjusting Sofia's IV drip. "He's being treated on another floor. Let's focus on getting you checked first, okay?" Sofia's heart sank, but she nodded weakly. The minutes crawled by as the medical team inspected her injuries. A fractured wrist and superficial cuts and bruises. "You're very lucky," the doctor said as he reviewed her chart. "You'll recover, but you'll need rest." "I need to see Paul," Sofia said, her voice firmer now, laced with desperation. "Please." The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse before nodding. "All right, but only for a short visit. You need to take it easy." Sofia's steps were hesitant as she entered the sterile, dimly lit room. Her breath caught when she saw Paul. Tubes and wires snaked around his still form, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the only sign of life. "Paul," she whispered, her voice breaking. Paul's mother turned sharply at the sound of Sofia's voice. Her face was a mask of pain and worry, her eyes red from crying. "Sofia," she said, her voice tight. "Mrs. Cortez." Sofia's voice faltered as she met the older woman's gaze. "What happened?" Karen asked, her tone teetering between accusation and desperation. Sofia swallowed hard, guilt clawing at her. "We were talking. I wasn't paying attention to the road. He tried to swerve, but the truck, it came out of nowhere." Her words came in broken gasps, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't see it, and Paul didn't either, until it was too late." Karen's lips trembled as she absorbed Sofia's words. "It wasn't your fault," she said, finally, though her voice was thick with grief. Sofia moved closer to Paul's bedside, her good hand reaching for his. His skin was warm, but his grip was unresponsive. Tears fell freely now, as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Paul. Please come back to me." Karen watched from the corner of the room, her husband's steady hand on her shoulder. Paul's younger brother, Ethan, sat silently by the window, his face a mix of shock and anger. Sofia stood there, the weight of guilt and helplessness pressing down on her as she clung to Paul's hand. The faint hum of machinery filled the air in Paul's new room at the Manor Crest Long-Term Care Facility. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, punctuated by the occasional murmur of staff and the steady beeping of monitors. The personal touches his family had added, a framed picture of Paul in uniform, a small stack of books his mother said he loved, did little to mask the sterile atmosphere. Maria Smith adjusted her scrubs as she reviewed her assignments for the night shift. She'd been working at the facility 4 years, but this was her first shift caring for Paul Cortez. Maria listened to the nurses whispering about the new patient, a decorated military officer whose promising life had been derailed by a tragic accident. After going through several patient rooms with Randy, the departing evening nurse's aide, they entered Paul's room. Randy, a gay, long-time team member, introduced Maria to the new patient. "And this is Paul Cortez," Randy began. "He is in a coma, Louvre, so he will be easy for you to take care of." Maria paused as she gazed at Paul, her heart tugging at the sight of him. His chiseled features were softened by the stillness of his condition, his once commanding presence now subdued. Despite the circumstances, she couldn't help but notice his handsome face, even with the faint scars left by the accident. As morning shift neared, Maria entered Paul's room. "Good morning, Paul," she said softly, approaching his bedside. There was no response. But Maria had learned early in her career that patients in comas could sometimes hear more than they let on. "I want you to know that even though I'll be getting off from work soon, I'll be back again tonight," she began. "By the way, my name is Maria." She adjusted the blinds, letting in just enough light to soften the sterile white of the hospital room. A bowl of warm water and a stack of clean towels sat on the rolling tray beside her. She adjusted his pillows and smoothed the blankets over his legs. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I want you to know that it's not every day I get to care for a hero." Her lips curved into a small smile as she glanced at the photo of him in uniform. "You look sharp in that picture of you in a uniform, by the way. I bet you are one of the best the military has ever had." She chuckled softly at her own remark, feeling a bit silly after working all night. 4 months had passed. Each time Maria came into Paul's room, she would carry out the same routine. "Hi, Paul," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a friend now, though they'd never exchanged words. She dipped the cloth into the water and wrung it out, her hands deft from practice. "I know you probably can't hear me, but I think it helps if I talk. Makes this room feel less lonely." She gently ran the cloth over his arm, her touch tender, almost reverent. "I was thinking about my family today," she began, her voice tinged with both fondness and sorrow. "I've never told you, but I grew up in a little village in Mexico. We didn't have much, but we had each other. My mama worked so hard, and my papa, well, he spoke English, which was rare where we lived. He taught me words and spoke to me in English since I was little. Table, chair, dream. It felt like magic, learning to converse with another world." She paused, rinsing the cloth before moving to his other arm. "When I was 18, my mama said we had to leave. Papa had gotten shot dead by the drug cartel. Things were getting worse all around. No money, no safety. It wasn't a choice, really. We crossed together, me, my mama, and my 2 little sisters." Her voice caught, and she stopped, wiping for a moment, staring out the window, as if she could see that memory etched into the horizon. "They didn't make it," she whispered as tears came to her eyes. "The desert is cruel, but somehow I made it. I promised myself that I'd make it worth it. For them." Maria worked in silence for a moment, her movements careful and precise. "I don't tell anyone here, you know," she continued, her voice firmer now, "about how I came to live in the U.S. It's a secret. People don't look at you the same if they know. But one of the immigration officers I met at immigration told me about Manor Crest. She said they needed good, hard-working people. They hired me, then trained me, and helped me get my nurse's aid certificate, and that is how I am working here." She continued, "I believe my ability to read and speak in English helped me to get hired. That's all, thanks to my papa. He used to say, learning a new language is like building a bridge. I didn't understand what he meant back then, but now I think I do." "I don't know if you can hear me," she admitted one day, her voice quieter as she adjusted his bed. "But I hope you can. I live in an apartment. It's not far from work. I feel lonely sometimes, but not when I see you. I hope you don't feel lonely, Paul." The weeks went on. Maria made sure Paul received the best care she could offer. She often lingered a little longer in his room, her conversations becoming more personal. One day, as she was bathing him, she noticed he physically responded to her touch. She felt astonished. She touched him again, gazing in amazement at his physical response. "You know, you are very special, mi amor. You seem like the kind of man I want to be involved with," she said, while finishing the bed bath. "Maybe I give you a longer kiss. Is that okay?" Maria leaned over and kissed Paul's lips. Maria knew she was developing more feelings for Paul, even if it seemed irrational. He was a man frozen in time, unreachable yet present. And still she couldn't help but hope that one day he might wake up and remember how she loved him. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air as Maria finished updating a chart at the nurse's station. The quiet hum of the overhead lights was interrupted by the faint chime of the front door. She glanced up to see a striking woman in uniform step inside, her confident stride immediately drawing attention. The woman's dark hair was neatly pulled back, her posture straight and precise, her military service evident in her demeanor. Following closely behind her was a man, tall snippets of their conversation, as the woman lowered her voice. "Sofia," the man said softly, "are you sure about this? I don't want to cause a scene." "It won't take long," Sofia replied, her voice firm yet calm. "I just need to tell him. You wait here, okay?" Maria stiffened slightly as she heard Sofia continue. "I've waited 2 years, and it's time to move on. Paul deserves to hear the truth. I owe him that much." The man sighed but nodded, settling into one of the chairs in the lobby, as Sofia made her way down the hall. Maria's heart quickened as she watched the woman approach Paul's room. Once the hallway was silent, Maria walked into Paul's room. She paused, her eyes softening as she took in his still form. Everything seemed the same, his face serene, his chest rising and falling in time with his breaths. But as she moved closer, she noticed something different. His eyes, there was a faint moistening in them, a glimmer that hadn't been there before. Maria's breath caught, and she sat beside him, her fingers lightly brushing his hand. "You hurt her, didn't you?" she said softly. "I'm so sorry, Paul. I don't want you to be sad. You're such a great guy. You don't deserve this." She began his routine bed bath, her hands gentle as always. But this time, as she moved the cloth over his chest, she felt something, an unmistakable physical jerk. She glanced closely at him, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. But instead of embarrassment, she felt a quiet happiness. "You remember me," she whispered, her smile warm. "You can feel I know it," she murmured. As she continued massaging him during the bath, Maria realized just how much she looked forward to these moments with Paul. Her time with him had become more than just work. It was a connection, a solace. "I'll be back here," she promised, her voice steady. "You don't have to go through this alone." As she finished, smoothing the blanket over him, Maria felt a peaceful contentment settle over her. Paul might not be able to speak, but his bodily responses to her touch meant the world to her. The room was quiet. Paul's parents, Karen and Stephen, entered the room together, their teenage son Ethan trailing behind them. Ethan had grown taller in the past few years, his lanky frame a testament to the passage of time that Paul himself hadn't been able to witness. Karen approached Paul's bed first, her hand trembling slightly as she brushed a strand of his hair back. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's Mom. We're all here to see you today." Stephen placed a steadying hand on her shoulder and then turned to their son. "Go ahead, Ethan," he said gently. Ethan stepped forward, awkwardly shoving his hands into his pockets. "Hey, Paul," he said, his voice breaking just a little. I graduated high school, and I'm heading to college in the fall, UCLA. I'm following in your footsteps, brother." Karen smiled through her tears. "He's so excited, Paul. We're all so proud of him, but we wish you were here to see it too." Stephen sat in the chair beside Paul's bed, his eyes studying his son's still face. "Your doctor says there's only a 20% chance you'll ever wake up, Paul," he began, his voice low and steady. "But that percentage doesn't matter to us. We still believe you'll wake up. We still have faith that you'll come back to us." Karen leaned down, pressing a kiss to Paul's forehead. "We miss you so much, honey. We know you're still in there, and we'll keep waiting, no matter how long it takes." Ethan shuffled his feet, then reached out to take Paul's hand. "I know I don't come by as much as I should," he admitted, "but I'm always thinking about you, big bro. I'll keep making you proud, okay?" They stayed for a while, talking to Paul as if he could hear every word. Karen recounted family updates, Ethan's grade average, their new puppy, the garden they'd planted in the backyard. Stephen shared a few funny stories, determined to bring some lightness to the room. Eventually, it was time to go. Karen kissed Paul's cheek again, whispering, "We love you so much," before following Stephen and Ethan out of the room. The door closed softly behind them, leaving Paul alone once more. That night, Maria stepped quietly into Paul's room, the echoes of his family's earlier visit still lingering in the air. She glanced at him, his face calm and unchanged, framed by the soft light filtering through the blinds. Setting down the basin of warm water and towels, she smiled faintly. "Hi, Paul," she said softly, pulling up a chair beside his bed. "I saw your family here this morning. Your mom, dad, and brother. They were talking about you, sharing all the things happening in their lives. Did you hear them?" She reached out, gently brushing her fingers against his hand. "Your parents said they still have hope and faith you'll come back. They don't care what the doctors say. Your family believes you're coming back. So do I." Maria's voice trembled slightly as she continued. "I know you're still here. I can feel it in my heart, even when it doesn't always seem like it. You're fighting in your own way, and I'll keep believing that too." She stood, rolling up her sleeves as she prepared for his bath. Her movements were deliberate and caring, her hands gliding over his skin with a mixture of care and tenderness. As she massaged his shoulders and arms, then down towards his abdomen and hips with the soapy face cloth, she paused, her breath catching. She saw it, that noticeable response again. His muscles felt tense. Her heart leapt. "You felt that, didn't you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it. I see that you're here with me." Her smile widened as she continued the bath, her hands moving with even more care. When she massaged his thighs and legs, she felt more responses, his body clearly acknowledging her presence and effort. "You're amazing, Paul," Maria murmured, her voice filled with warmth. "Even like this, you find a way to let me know you're here with me. I am so happy, Paul." After finishing the rinsing, she dried him off and adjusted his blankets. She lingered in his room a while longer. Finally, she left the room with a smug sense of satisfaction. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow through the windows of Manor Crest, as the day nurse entered Paul's room. She hummed quietly to herself as she prepared to take his vitals, moving with the practiced ease of routine. Then she noticed it. Paul's fingers, once so still, twitched against the sheet. The nurse froze, blinking, to make sure she wasn't imagining things. Slowly, she leaned closer. "Mr. Cortez?" she whispered. His fingers moved again. Then, His eyelids fluttered. The nurse's heart leapt as she grabbed his chart and bolted into the hallway. Code alert! Paul's waking up. Within minutes, the room was bustling with the medical team. The doctor leaned over Paul, speaking calmly as the machines beeped steadily in the background. Mr. Cortez, the doctor said, his voice reassuring. Can you hear me? Paul's eyes opened fully, blinking against the light. He turned his head slightly toward the voice. Where am I? The doctor smiled, a mix of relief and amazement. You're at Manor Crest Nursing Center. You've been in a coma for over 5 years. Paul's brows furrowed, processing the weight of the words. His voice was hoarse but determined. 5 years? Yes, the doctor replied. It's nothing short of miraculous that you're awake. We'll take things slow, but for now, welcome back. Soon after, Paul's parents and brother arrived, their faces a mixture of disbelief and joy. Karen rushed to his bedside, tears streaming down her face. Paul, you're awake, she cried, gripping his hand. His father and brother stood close behind, their voices thick with emotion, as they spoke words of encouragement and love. Word spread quickly, and the media caught wind of Paul's miraculous recovery. Reporters hovered outside the nursing home, eager for details. By the end of the day, Paul had been discharged to continue his recovery at home, surrounded by his family. 2 days later, Maria returned to work after her days off, eager to see Paul, as she always did. When she checked the chart, her heart sank. His name was no longer listed. One of the nurses approached her, smiling. Didn't you hear? Paul Cortez woke up. He went home with his family. Maria's breath caught in her chest. He's gone? The nurse nodded, oblivious to the ache settling in Maria's chest. It's a miracle, really. Isn't it wonderful? Maria forced a smile. Yes, it's wonderful. But as the days turned into weeks, the emptiness Paul's absence left behind grew. Maria missed him, the quiet moments, the care she'd given, the connection she'd felt. One quiet afternoon, Maria was called to the front desk. When she arrived, she found Karen, Paul's mother, waiting for her. Mrs. Cortez? Maria said, her heart pounding. Is everything okay with Paul? Karen smiled warmly. Yes, Maria. Paul is doing well. He moved back to his house. He asked me to come here today. He wanted me to ask you something. Maria tilted her head, confused. Me? Karen nodded, her smile widening. My son told us he remembers you. He said he wants to repay you for your extra care and attention. Paul believes you're the person who helped him find his way back to us, and we are deeply appreciative too. Maria took a deep breath. He said that? Yes, Karen said, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. He sent me to ask you to consider working as his private sitter. He wants you to be with him as he continues to recover, and he wants to pay you so that you can just work for him now. Maria's mouth opened in astonishment. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Karen said, with a gentle laugh. Paul wouldn't want it any other way. A faint smile slowly spread across Maria's face. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling inside her. I'd be honored. The first morning Maria prepared to go to work as Paul's sitter for the first time. She felt something she hadn't in weeks, a sense of purpose, of joy, and maybe even possibly this was her true love waiting for her. She would see Paul again soon, whom she had come to know well in an esoteric sense that only she and he knew, and this time he would be awake. And together, she believed, they would move forward.